The director told me to sign off on the falsified reports or hand in my badge. So I opened my laptop and showed the entire study council was really enticed those. Was worrying on thust reports. 43 years of compensati and Collins quaffed, not Coleman's. Provisintaves sets wearing at Pem from Cacris the conference table, waiting to see what one knows Torm. 40 quaffed. Richard Caldwell, Executive Director of the Whitfield Regional Infrastructure Authority, had just delivered his uploaded ultimatum in front of every person in that room. HIS, Nepedy Adawar. Dor had been hired 8 months ago, with 0 field experience and a freshly printed MBA from Dude. Leaned back in his scare with a quinted MBA from Dude Pert. Leaned back in his chiden under the table, munder the smark that made my hands tighten under the table. My name, Whitfield Fins. I am 54 years old, and I moment 23 years a senior estructural engineer. On government infrastructure projects meaned absolutely nothing to the Caldwell family. Let me tack you back to Werrell family. Let me tack you met the startup. Because you need exactly how Dwelby got to the room. Ben pertain into Hartfield Regional Infrastructure Authority. I spent 11 years at Kirschmelteen. I spent 11 years as a combatant in the army. I built forward operating bases in Iraq, were pared blown bridges in Kandahar, and learned the true in Kandahar, and learned the true is not a lane to Dratakurl. And learned the true IT is the difference between a sadier making it home and a sadier not making it home. When I transitioned to civilian infrastructure work, I brubbed that mindset with Hemcher's work F. I brubbed that minset with him. Every bridge I sign it off on, I sign off on knowing that real people cross it every single day. Families driven home are a Tuesday night, including my daughter Sophie. Sophie is 17 now. She has been crossing the Millbrook Avenue overpass on her school bus every morning for turning her a score. So when Richard hired his nephew Darrett to manage the Millbrook expansion, project and Tarrant stacked and Darrett started talking about cutting rebar specifications to save the authority. Money, it stopped at being a professional disagrin for men. It stopped at being a professional disagrin for men. It became Semething and Saritsly and Sagrin for men. Derek Holloway showed up his first week deriving a lease BMW 5 Series. W-Reen shows that Proboldswe's carrots not that the mourners, and fears that probably cost more than me bi-weekly paycheck. He was 31 years old, did not have a single engineering certification, and had never set food on ants carries, and had never set food on a tanshakes condistration. Richard introduced him Ado Ward Department meeting as the authorities, new project optimization director and Anunka that Derek, their gird and pains, but Melfer. That Derek would be partnering with me on the Burlook expansion. Partner, I gurs Ward for Waddle Chili. Nilbork Avenue overpass expansion was a $47 million proffer 7 funded project funded 12 funded through the Pesri Highway Administration grant. The contract specified grade 60 formed Provenfrenfergen. The contracts to specific care grade 60 formed between for Koringer Perry Griffin for Gaffer Sturker, and contract of war the 45500 firm, TOS specifications existed for Arena, for Team Masson. The overpass carries an average of 22,000 vehicles per day and was destined to withstand a Henry flood of one without structural compromise. Derek's first idea was substituting grade 40 rebar at 60% of the specified density and dropping the concacutter spec down to 3000 psi. When I sat down with him to came again, why that was not going to happen, was not gonna happen, he smiled like I had society smithing charming. Gamies, I understand you come from a more traditional background. But the authority is facking real budget pressures, this facking real gutted pressers. This fiscal year, and Uncle Versailles Richard needs measurable efficiency improvements from this department. My analysis shows WE can read a models cost by 3.41 tolerant and still deliver a compliant sturgers. I laid the Federa specifications across his desk, that is not he Federa specification. Across his desk, that is not he ficanies. Grade 40 Reber has a wears a 40 this, PRA'd sets E. Grade 60 yields E60,000. PSE Dells E60,000 PS. On a sturger the size carrying this loaded, That difference is not a preference. It is the margin between. It is the margin between a bridge that lasts 50 years and one that develops critical fatigues and one that develops critical fatigue cracking in Fiffin. And when it cracks, it does not anyone of Warnemer first. He waved his hand in the air like I was reading him a living other forecast from a city he would never visit. I brought my concretron to Reichard the next morning. Richard was a politically connonded man. Helver had run the authority for 9 years by staying friendly with the right saying, friendly with the right city consumers and keeping project up budgets within 10% of projectings. He was not an engine. Distenem projectins. He looked at me across his desk that morning with an expression that told me had cementers. Before I walked in the door, James Derritt brings a fresh perspective on Kosmanagman. We have had several overruns on federal projects in the last 2 years, and the city council is watching this authority very, very closely. His analysis deserves a serious consideration. I sprayed the lads deserve a serious consideration. I sprayed the loud calculations across his desk. This is a 33% retention in tensile low-ed capacity. If W submitted specifications to FWA's compowereds as consistent equations, to FWA's community with the proba desingen, W near committing federal grant fraud, and if this bridge fin fells in 10 years to grant fittery. And if this bridge fin fells in 10 years to Putchin Sequoia projections. Richard straightened his tie and looked out his window towed the parking slot. You have been a valuable member of this authority for a long time. I would hate for your stornober possessional reputation to suffer because as you could nate it tap to modern perturn projational. To wreck its hap to modern projational, this conversation happened. That is all I am going to say. The next 3 months were the slowest erosion I have ever experienced. Sharded sending revision requests to marterial supplers with name copedians, with my name copied at the bottom as if I had afore them. TW of I best, filed engineers. Carolyn Marson Parson Pedo Ostrokai, filed internal transferences after decreach made it clear during a beta department mentiving that persono, which question had popped in a vacation its patients, were not to blade to question it pots and alestration the so were not to bill in a martin starating the cloring for word admits the verdepartily was often foreign going foreign. I started keeping a logbook, every one call, every mail, every specification change request. I photographed every duocommanderic keeping copies archin corded and keep it copies on a partal. Hard drive I stored at home. Hard hobord azord Henry. I knew how this story usually ends from people like me. The engineer bupsha pushes back Bacombs the engineer which accousers the science. The veteran which a refuses to sign off Bacombs the veteran which a caption which not apt at. I hadn't a capt. I hadn't a good people. I knew. I need more than my word against a director's neposow. The breaking point came 6 months into the project, 2 weeks before the authority was ostidal smunty final. I was staying late in the Tona Tourske going over soil-bearing reports when I heard voices from Richard's office. The door was slightly open. I stopped it in the Herzener Vassal, waitin' forward, and fold out my fund. Uncleared out my fund towards out my fund. Uncleared, yort. What if the Forest and Holcolate inspector asked Tors, see the regical odd calculations. I do not have the background to whisper details to sutral questions. You are not going to need to. I am framing this as a value engineering outcome. The story is that names reviewed specifications and confirmed their met or credible performance roles. If there are any technical discrepancies, WED assumed that Hesche failed to raise conkeners during the Reeve period. But I never approved any of this. Hesch ben fenning use on theirs, Duringens for months. That is the point 7 serious, Duringens for months. That is the point seconds, Durake. Right. Now he's in those corrections. After WE submits certification, he becomes the general of record for each. Sign it off in a federal quarter, sign it off in a federal project, and then slam heated. His ward against Oakers. We jinst Oakers. I stood in that hallway for a long 10 seconds before I walked back to my desk and it sat down. This was not nepotism. This was not bureaucratic incompetence. This was a deliberate plan to use me as a shield. Certifia spurtifria stursa curly comma rooms bridge to the federal government, and pocked at the difference. And when assismu severn. And when a severnly failed, and sturschel der truce over liferna cruli. My name would have on the pairwort, and sturschel der crus el der truth murmel. My name would on the paperwort, clear, adjudio. Both voices identifiable. I drove home that night, and SATI and my drive away for 21 minutes before I went to Zamorti Menitas. Sobi was at the kitchen table doing work. She looked up and asked it if I was okay. Hey. I told her I was fine. I was not. Tyva was okay. The next morning, I got a text from Carol Wen Marshas, one of the giningers wedded transferret out. It said only, call me. Not from work. I called her from my personal, ferns worrying my lunch, breaching my lunch. Break my lunch break thrink in Garin the park in 3 blocks from the authority. Names you need to sompids. From the important, garage 3 blocks from the authority. Before I transread. I saw Richard's assistant pulling personnel flysin. Turst yours. Not just yours. Pets. Mine. 3 other people from the Jenningering department. Sue was compartment, and it was not a performance review. What's Kendabensiment, and it was not a performance review. What Kendabsiment? Corretraction bioshin. But not the minted. Corretraction duosiment. But not the reals. The kind you build when you need a paper trail that says somebody was alerty being managed out before their sarity thing and manage out before they started making noise. James, which hard has done this before. The senior and condor before you, Frank de Delgrox, do you remintermer him? Hey left. Eber you pitly 4 years before I joined the authority. The official story was Orly Tribman. Frank found problems on the reversid corridor say. Corroborator per door. Projectin. Marginal suspicions, Sam Patern. BY. The time rooted the mini, proved it to anyone outside the authority. Richard had a ready bullet a file on him that made him look paranoid and disgruntled. Frank spent 2 years trying to lead. Frank spent 2 years trying to clear his name. A fringly just a wine to clear his name. A fringly just out of state. Because Frank is my uncle. And when I transfer yet out of your department last month, I called him and told him what was happening. He told him it to warn you. Carlin, why recalling me now? Why are you calling me now? Because I still have friends in that. Ricard is planning to submit the final certification documents next Friday. On seat those quote bore with your name on them, you are done. Name, is there anyone outside? Mayor Garrett had retired from the State Department of Transportation after 2020 use as a federal Bruins house, a hard menti too. W. Hard had worked together on 2 projects, Airly and Mike Karen, Skimenta Wertmenchek's Problas, Orly and Mike Karen and she Problas, SHE Live it in Clemson now and OC occasionally serve it as an independent reviewer foreign state AUDITs. I had not spoken to Margaret's in AD. What in the U do you understand is that Margaret Ozai was not just a retired bureaucrat. She had spent 2 decades processing federal bridge certification submissions and had personal working relationships throughout the 4 organisations, throughout the 4 Regeneskantaf, Ethingris and Frast. More importantly, shed never onsen her carer looked the other way on a dio-cafframator, the way on a dio-commentation irregularity, and she was not about to start. I drove to Sklemson on a Saturday day and spent 4 hours at Tira Catherine Fenda 4 hours at her kitchen table. Shay you went to 2M, the Riv Dio Kemen spent 4 hours at her kitchen, Derrick's Rivis versions. The side by West Eye comparison of Rabar. Grade and concrete, compressive first strength preserve Granth. The Eanbale cranes, where I had raced objections, and Richard had raced objections, and Richard had overruled them. The foreign recording from the hallway. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. Names. This is not a paperworked problem, I fees. Specifications were submitted as compliant with the approved design. WN are talking about potent tolls criminal charge under Title 18 and violations of the falsely Sam's app. I know. Do you also know that Richard is going to go after in Binwheel as in Zvenzavans? A has apparently done. There's before, and he is going to try to borrow your credibility before you can present any of this. I know that too. That is why I called you. Say his, you'd first front for a moment. Then, say, I have a contact at the 4 regional office. Karen Whitformant. Then, say, I have a contact at the 4 regional office. Karen Whitmore. SHE rungs. Grant compliance for the entire Sothienstert. If I bring her this documentation, she will not sit on it. Reichard has a city commentation. Schicard has a city compliance presentation. Ustrid has a city council presentation. Ustrid fort 4 tums. A's planning to announce quiet's tomes, and use the osecation to formalize duris, permalize direct, burlius permanent, project director. That is also when he would position me as the gonorrhea, which probed the rested specifications. Then W1, probelasted specification. Then W1 year befroved of der specifications. Let him walk into that presentation, thinking he's already won. So medum's the most dangerous thing you can do to a corrupt man is let him get comfortismians concertable. I spent the week printering. I compiled everything into a formal packet, the engineering analysis showing exactly how far the resid specifications deviated from federal requirements. The documentary emit, derishits in hod resid sections. I had raised it in Richard's responses, a materials cost breakdown showing where the $3.4 million in Trizzy hence and projected savings was schooly coming from, and the phone recording. I also wrote a letter to the authorities board of directors and dated it. At Saturday forning has, think formally documenting that I had never approved any deviation from the original Finnaires and Hatchenoker, from the original specifications. I sent it to my personal email and to Carolyn Marsh with instructions not to open it unset her too. Monday morning, Reitard was in a noticeably good mood. He spent the day in back-to-back meetings with City Good Mode. He spent the day in back-to-back meetings with City Coliseans and the authorities communications director, Derek, stopped by office at 2 o'clock in the Asperdulock in the afternoon with a look in his face like a man face-to-face spent the money. James, just a heads up. Tomorrow's presentation is going to involve some Anans Mountains about department recruiting. You will be moving into Sarian earlier, less day-to-day project management, more consortative functions. Uncloris Quarted thinks it is a good fit for where we're near care. I, to which about Frank de Clockroy's moving out of state and spending 2 years trying to clear his name. I took it about every person here's carried. Every person across a bridge and in Caros, a bridge and in Caris, a more authentic clinning about it, to kinking about it that someone hone it says had done through their dares thinking about it thereof. I picked up my phone and texted Margaret one word, Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Tomorrow'd quay grey and cold. The Hartfund Seti Corrid Seti Cornchbers held about 6 beers held about 60 people, when fullt. Tat morning Ed was carrying consumables, their steffers, representatives from the Federal Highway Administration Regional Office, including Karen Whitmore, 2 cents a more, crew in Whitmore 5 door. Pew 2, I recognized it from her photograph, our 40 board members, and several local press contacts. Margaret had cots. Margaret had made callers. I did not know exactly what this contained, but the room was considerably more populated than a Routine Probship Millstone presentation would normally attract. Richard opened with the Polish confidence of a man we ist won first play. Age walked the console through project timelines, budget metrics, and Darrett's constipinization, controlled abutions. Darrett's operationalization controlled re-it esadum at the presentation table with a folder of reports and Ant's presentation that managed to be both humble and self-congratulatory the reports and Ant's time gratulatory the same time gratulatory the same time. And I am pleased to announce that thanks to Derek's exceptional work on value enduring, the Millbrook expansion is project to congen and $3 detective com and $3 $1 million under budget while meeting all fettering requirements. Richard Paced faring inical requirements. Richard Paced for infinistral requirements. or engineering team has even confirmed specification confirmation compliant all crossal Marian Sturch ritual elements. I felt the W weight of that sentence in Ben Baucast. At that point, he turned to me with an expression I reconfraternits from O conversation around God nights repronzokrats. Gamies, I know you have had some questions about certain Ribis parameters. Would you like to add anything before Tulverus param? I raised objections now. I was the difficult employed as drupidding a successful project his presentation in front of the SETI cousin in front of the SETI cousiny. If I stayed cuyet, if I stayed linderist slammed that the Shennington. If I stowed a petjits tacitly enjorzit his slam that the gon fermenting tinkuds confirmed comfimer comet. I opened my laptop and connected to the room's display system. The first slide was a stive. The first slide was a steed to vile. Left column, fly proved specifications for the Millbrook Avenue overpass expansion. Right column, the specifications contained in the documents Derek had been circulating from contraculating from Crocatar bids. The rebar substitution is here. The original Deschen required grade 60 deformed bars at a specific density that gives the primary deck a stursature a yield capacity of approximately 2 tap burns. The yield capacity down to approximately 900,000 pounds per square foot. For Rontrance, the Strew square fruit. For Rontrance, the Strew coral Dijon standard for this overpass requires a minimum of 1.8 million. I can fill the temperature in the room creans. The Concord subtense is here, 3000 psi MX instead of 4500 psi. On a bridge deck it coast to Frieset thos Weiskles and Daking Salt. A 3000 ps mice will begin showing surface scaling and micro-cracking within 7 to porking within Kennenrin, the pro-cracking within 7 to 10 years. The proved diversion calls for an 4540 axlay, that reason. We scards compulsors held, but only barely vong. James, their shins were revids and confirmed by Ozier and the cornering team, including yourself. That is not accurate. I have documented rejections to every one of Dash, Frenchins cooing back semen months. But what I want to play things going back semen months. But what I want for it, bare room right now is not my documentation. It is years. I open the audio file on my laptop. The room hajar Derek's voice first. Uncle Rijard. What if the flaw inspector asks, which is seek the original load calculations? I do not have the background to sesame through his carks to resecure questions. And then Resicard's voice, steady and methodical, the voice of a man which has had this conversation before. You are not going to need to. I am framing this as a valuant internita. The story is that James reviews the Rivis specifications and confirmed they met all Christurk. The Furfermans, the Riskerl, Tolschregarns were retained illegally and are completely out of context, Richard said. His voice had lost some lething. He knew it and so did everyone in the room in fair. Astratively everyone in the room. Astrally. I am Karen Whitmore, Grant Compliance Director for the Floss-Eldesez Regional Office. Galdwell. We have serious concurrence about potential violations of your federal grant agreement and possible false statements in submitted commentation. 2 federal agents we gomentation. 2 federal agents near the back row stood up and moved to tard the front of room one. Richard Caldwell and Derek Calloway. W needy to Calloway. W needy to Campany West. You have the right to remain silent. Derek Cam did not mow for about 4 scones. He looked at his uncle and maters. Richard was a laddie looking at the table in front of him, and for the first time in the 8 months, I had can home him. He had absolutely nothing to say. What Furwad was mething to say? What Furwad was Medigirl and Thorthov? Federo agents essecured prob troptical intimenteen from the Aforthov. The FR compliance. Team condested a full agatit of every specification. Submission associated with the Millbrook project and 3 other fettering frastrikert. Grants the Affordia had managed in the previous 4 years. Richard and Derek were talking from the building in the same time Tuesday morning light that filtered toward the consul Prenvendaus. Derek's expression when the adjutants escorted him ber windows. Derek's expression when the agents escorted him past the council table was not the one I expect. It was not anger. It was confidence. I do not think it had genuinely Osik who read to him before that moment that his uncle could not actually protect him from federal law. The investigation that followed 2 months. What a cumber there, was lager tier for Tim. Richard had been running a pattern of falsification, substitution questions break, cross-federal infrastructure grants for nearly 3 years. The S-Toratu was always the same. Appervive completion specifications from for submission, then interrogacy resid lower grade materials during the porticator bized during the contractor bid phase and poxted the difference 12 for inflated management of fees to complicate vielfrance 12. The total amount across 4 projects was just under $9 million. Frank Delacroix, Caroline Marsh's uncle, flew back from a reason Marsh's uncle, flew back from a reason to give a testimony about what Richard had done to his carer 4 years earlier. The carers include in the federal indictment as evidence of a pattern of condescent. Richard Caldwell Peldiguli to federal crant fraud, conspiracies. Hey Rekovid, 7 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay back $8.9 million in restitution. Derek Callaway ACC putted a plea agreement on exchange for cooperation and received 6 months of probation, a permanent ban from managing any federally funded probate, and a permanent ban from managing any federally funded probate, and a civil judgment that will follow him for years. The Millbrook Avenue overpass expansion restarted from the foundation phase with compliant materials and independent memorials and quieter. It's cost more and it took longer in. That is what doing it right cost more in tet. That is what doing it right costs in tans. The authorities, board ask, made to serve as interim director during the transition, and 3 months later, they made it permanent. I told them I would take the Rommel to conditions. The first was that WE establish an independent engineering review board for no federal specification. Submissions, reporting directly to the board of directors with no executive override of directors. The second was that WE create a formal whistleblower protection protocol that does not route through the director's office. Both conditions were met before I signed it. Dwayvor's door, horde of fortigeners in the last 4 months, all of them evaluated on technical competence and full-yield experience. Not one of them is Medibody's neperience. Not one of them is Medibody's neperience. Margaret was your own overyord, independent vengibard. Seichi drives up from Clemson a month and drinks bad coffee in Okrank and Surrey conference room and asks the kind of questions that make calm for chemtions that make calm for people uncomfortable. I consider that a feature, not a bug. Thank to Datarook. Calm about comfortable. He told me that when he tried to do what I did 4 years ago, he did not have a Margaret. He did not have the recording. He did not have the recordings. And he did not have anyone have a one a polite or walked at the same path and could to tell him what to dole him what to document and when. He told me to make sure it did not happen to anyone as said. I think about that's one Kalebany. I sign off on specifications now. If you are sitting in the situation like the one I was in and where you know cementing is wrong, where the numbers do not is wrong king is wrong, where the numbers do not 80 up, where someone were family connections and zero field experience is reading the work of perfence is fishing techids earning what they now. Here is what I will tell you from where he stand. Now here is what I will tell you from where I stand now. Do you comment everything from day one? Not when you think trouble is coming, from the first conversation that does not feel right. Date it. Save it somewhere that is not on company equipment. If your name is being used Bing, you sit on door competence. If your name is being used on door comments, you did not approve, write a dated letter to or self-saving exactly that and get to time is bad. And get it time is dumped by a third party. I tack as 15 minutes and it is the difference between your word and your proof. Fin someone out sov went outside. I mean someone with access was credibility and with nothing to lose by telling the truth. Margaret was that person for me. Most people have someone like that in their neck, and they're not called because they do not more to seem like they cannot handle their own problems. Call them anywhere, problems they cannot handle their former problems. Do not wait for the right moment to present your evidence. Present it when you have it, in the most public and official forum available to you. Corp systems survive by keeping problems private. Recharge Spencer's managing problems quietly, behind closed doors, with personnel falls and sub-the-plea threats. The moment that recording played through the constable frecked played toward of the constable camber speakers, he had no more coger rooms leaf trokrans lakers. He had no more queuet rooms leaf tor. And don't understand this, the people to tell you that whistleblows never win or fin people have never had in people. We have never had to decide with further him. It is easy to better to stay quiet. It is easy to vethinkle about system. It were not inside of. I know exactly what saved me. Documentation. Airleys was standing, and a recording made in a hallway on a Thursday night because something told me to stay in the because something told me to stay and the build me to listening a little. The expansion project is about 18 months from completion. When it opens, it will be bleal. The original specifications. Grade 60 beer chinstrissipitianations. Grade 60 beer. 4500 psi concentrate. Every safety mark in the Norganers with decision intended. It will carry school buses and ambulances and families for the years, and the people on it will never know anyone most made a mate for it to decision. That is fine with me. That is exactly how it work. Richard Tog, family, loyalty, and manufactured paper trails can override mayoral science and federal law. He discovered they cannot. They're tapered they cannot. Der take not the grid of great agree and a bull and unclone with conweed with Canadians where soma betute for knowing what in one and queres and cable. Wongum out that in a way he is going to be paying for from a long time. Experience is not a premonce. Experience is not a premerence. It is the accumulated consequence of every time some matter wonk and the person spibble had to figures out why and thinkin' want wonk and the personable pestable had to biggers out. You cannot open tims that out of an engineering department. You cannot MBO way through facezed, a rough or structural low-load calculation. And you cannot falsify your way pages bitchins. Piz does not care we sure way paste basics. Fish does not care we sure yornkle is. My name is Whitfield, Executive Director, Hartford Regional Infrastructure Superiority, 23040. 23's in the fields, 11 before that in the army, and every morning I sign my name to documents that oral people are depending on. I intend to keep ordinance that shrill people are depending on. I intend to keep ordering that signed it.